The land of men had always known war, but never like this. For centuries, humans had fought humans, kingdoms rising and falling, swords clashing for thrones, crowns, and gold. But the war against the vampiric empire was different. It was not about land. It was not about power. It was about survival. The vampires came at night, and the night belonged to them. Villages burned under their raids. Families vanished into the darkness, never seen again. The air itself felt heavy, as if the world held its breath, waiting for the next strike. In this chaos, among the countless soldiers who rose to fight, there was one man named Cale. He was not born of noble blood. He was not chosen by fate or blessed by gods. He was a simple man from a quiet farming village, a man who had learned the sword only to protect those he loved. Yet on the battlefield, his spirit made him stand apart. Cale's comrades often whispered about him. They said he never retreated. They said he had no fear. But the truth was different. Cale felt fear every time he raised his blade. He was human after all. His heart pounded, his hands shook, and his nights were filled with nightmares. But what made him different was this: he did not let fear decide his path. When the war called, Cale answered. He joined the front lines not for gold or glory, but because he could not stand watching the innocent suffer. He remembered the faces of children crying when the vampire raiders struck. He remembered the helplessness in the eyes of mothers who had lost their sons. He carried those memories like scars, and each one gave him the strength to keep fighting. One night, under a sky painted in fire and blood, Cale fought in a battle that would change everything. The Vampire Queen's army had descended upon a human fortress, their claws tearing through defenses, their wings blotting out the moon. Screams echoed across the battlefield as men fell like broken branches in a storm. Cale fought with all his strength, his sword flashing against the creatures of the night. Every strike was desperate, every breath was heavy. He saw his comrades fall around him, their bodies swallowed by the darkness. He shouted their names, but the night devoured their voices. In the chaos, Cale was struck down. A vampire's claw tore across his armor, leaving blood staining his chest. Stumbling, he retreated into the woods, his vision blurred, his strength fading. The sounds of battle grew distant until only silence remained. When Cale opened his eyes again, he found himself in the ruins of an old castle, its stones cracked and walls broken, as if the earth itself had tried to swallow it. Moonlight spilled through shattered windows, casting long shadows on the floor. He thought it was the end. He thought he had wandered into his grave. But then he heard it, a soft voice trembling like a dying flame. "Please, help me," Cale turned. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, but then he saw her. A woman stood in the corner of the ruined hall, chained against the cold stone wall. Her gown was torn, her skin pale like snow, and her silver hair fell in tangled strands over her shoulders. Her eyes glowed faintly red, yet they carried not hatred but sorrow. Cale's breath caught. He knew what she was, a vampire. Worse still, her presence felt different, heavier, more powerful. She was not a common creature of the night. He gripped his sword with his last bit of strength, his mind screaming at him to be ready. But she did not attack. She only lowered her head, blood dripping from her wounded arms, and whispered again, "Please, don't leave me here." Cale should have turned away. She was the daughter of his enemy, the very blood of the queen he fought against. To free her was madness. To trust her was suicide. Yet something in her voice stopped him. It was not the voice of a predator. It was the voice of someone abandoned, someone who had been hurt, left to suffer alone, and Cale, even bleeding and broken, could not ignore that cry. The night was silent, but in that silence the choice was made. A human warrior, weak and wounded, had stumbled upon the daughter of his greatest enemy. And instead of raising his blade, he took a step closer. The darkness of the world shifted that night, though neither of them yet knew it. The chains rattled softly when Cale stepped closer. His hand tightened around the hilt of his sword, but his heart was torn in two. He had been trained to see all vampires as enemies. They were the monsters who burned his village, who took lives without mercy. And yet, the woman before him did not look like a monster. She looked like a prisoner, broken and abandoned. The pale moonlight fell across her face, and Cale could see the pain in her eyes. They glowed faintly red like dying embers in a cold fire. Her lips trembled and her voice was weak, almost lost in the silence of the ruined castle. "Please," she whispered again. "Don't leave me here." Cale took a slow breath. Every instinct told him to turn away. She could be luring him into a trap. She could tear his throat open the moment he freed her. But something deeper, something inside his heart, refused to believe it. He saw the way her shoulders sagged, the way her body trembled with weakness. She was not a predator waiting to strike. She was suffering. "Who are you?" Kyle asked, his voice rough from battle and blood loss. Her eyes lifted, and for a moment he saw both pride and shame in them. "I am Selene, daughter of the Queen." The word struck him like a blade. His fingers tightened around his sword until his knuckles turned white. The Queen's daughter. The heir of the enemy who had killed thousands. If anyone from the human armies knew he stood here, they would brand him a traitor and cut him down on the spot. But before he could speak, Selene lowered her head again, her voice breaking. "I am no daughter to her. Not anymore. She betrayed me. She chained me here, because I would not follow her cruelty. I would not spill innocent blood for her." Cale's breath caught. He did not know if he could believe her. And yet her wounds were real. Deep gashes marked her arms and back. Her wrists were torn from the chains biting into her flesh. No princess would suffer this if she truly held her mother's favor. "You could kill me," Kyle said carefully, watching her every move. Her lips curled into something between a smile and a sob. "If I had the strength, I would not waste it on your death. I would use it to be free." The hall fell into silence again. The broken walls whispered with the wind, and the moon shone brighter, as though the heavens were watching this strange meeting. Cale sheathed his sword. His mind screamed at him that he was a fool, but his heart had already made the decision. He stepped closer, his boots echoing on the cold stone floor. Selene's eyes widened, as if she could not believe what he was about to do. He raised his sword again, but not against her. With a hard strike, the blade crashed against the chains. Sparks flew. The sound rang through the ruined castle like thunder. Selene gasped as the iron links shuddered but did not break. Cale raised his blade again. Again and again he struck, his arms aching, blood dripping from his wounds. Finally, with one last swing, the chain shattered. Selene fell forward, collapsing into his arms. Her body was light, fragile, trembling as though she had not stood in days. Her hair brushed against his shoulder, and for a moment he felt her fangs near his neck. His heart raced, but she did not bite. Instead, her voice came as a whisper against his ear. "Why? Why would you help me?" Cale looked down at her. He did not know how to explain it. He did not know why his heart had chosen this path. All he knew was the truth inside him. "Because you needed me," he said quietly. "And that's enough." Her eyes filled with something he had never expected. Tears. Crimson tears sliding down her pale cheeks. For the first time in her life, perhaps, someone had chosen to help her without fear, without demand, without cruelty. In that ruined hall, something unspoken passed between them. A fragile bond, born not of blood or duty, but of a simple act of mercy. Cale helped her to her feet, though his own strength was fading fast. Selene leaned against him, her breath shaky, her body weak. Together they stepped into the night. Behind them, the broken chains lay scattered on the stone floor, silent witnesses to the moment when the fate of both human and vampire changed forever. Neither of them knew what awaited them beyond the forest. Neither of them knew the dangers that would hunt them. But in that moment, as Cale carried the vampire princess away from her prison, he knew only one thing: he could not leave her behind. And Selene, for the first time in her immortal life, felt something strange bloom inside her heart. Hope. The forest was dark, but the shadows no longer frightened Cale. He carried Selene through the trees, her body weak against his shoulder. Every step was heavy, his wounds burning, yet he refused to stop. She had been chained and left to die. He would not abandon her now. The night air was cold, and the sound of crickets mixed with the distant cries of owls. Selene's breath was shallow, her eyes half closed. Cale could feel her trembling. He wanted to ask her if she was in pain, but he already knew the answer. Her wrists were raw, her arms bruised, her strength almost gone. Finally, he found shelter in a small cave hidden by vines. He lowered Selene gently to the ground and lit a small fire with the flint he carried. The warm glow spread through the cave, pushing back the darkness. For the first time that night, he could truly see her. She was beautiful, terribly, dangerously beautiful. Even in her weakness, she looked like a figure carved from moonlight. Her silver hair gleamed in the fire's glow, her crimson eyes reflecting the flames. Yet her beauty was marked by suffering. The torn gown, the bloodstains, the sorrow in her gaze. These made her more fragile than fierce. Cale tore a strip from his own cloak and wrapped her wounded wrists. His hands were rough but careful. Celine watched him silently, her eyes never leaving his face. Finally, her voice broke the silence. "You should have left me," she whispered. "If your people find out, they will call you a traitor. They will kill you for helping me." Kyle did not look up. He tied the cloth firmly and said, "Maybe, but I would rather die knowing I saved someone than live knowing I turned away." Her lips parted, but no words came. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever placed her life above their own. For a long while, they sat in silence. The fire cracked, the wind whispered outside, and their eyes met across the flames. Celine's voice trembled when she finally spoke again. "My mother, she told me love was weakness. She told me mercy was poison. I thought maybe she was right. But then you came." Cale's chest tightened at her words. He saw the loneliness in her, the weight of years spent under cruelty. He understood now why she had been chained. She was different from the others. She carried a heart that longed for something beyond blood and power. "I'm no hero," Cale said softly. "I just couldn't leave you there." To his surprise, Celine smiled faintly. It was a fragile smile, but real. "To me, you are more than a hero. You are the first light I have ever seen in the dark." Her words struck him deeply. Cale had always been just a soldier, just a man with a sword and stubborn courage. Yet in her eyes he had become something greater. Celine leaned back against the cave wall, exhaustion pulling her into sleep. But before her eyes closed, she whispered one more truth. "You gave me freedom, and freedom is life." Kyle sat by the fire long after she slept, watching the flames dance. His body ached, his wounds throbbed, but his heart was steady. He did not know what would come of this choice. Perhaps death, perhaps worse. But he did not regret it. He glanced at Celine, resting peacefully for the first time in years. In her face he saw more than beauty. He saw a fragile soul who had been denied kindness, denied hope until fate had brought her to him. And though he did not understand why, Cale made a silent vow that night. He would protect her. He would fight for her. He would not let the world take her freedom away again. Outside the cave, the wind carried the scent of smoke and blood. The war between humans and vampires still raged on. Both armies would soon realize the vampire princess had vanished and they would hunt her. But within the cave, by the small firelight, a new bond had been born. Not of kingdoms, not of bloodlines, but of something far stronger. Two hearts, one human, one vampire, had crossed paths in the darkest night. And from that meeting, the world would never be the same again. The days that followed were not easy. Cale and Celine moved through the wilderness, avoiding both vampire patrols and human scouts. To the world they were enemies, an impossible pair who should never have walked together. But in the silence of the forest, under the pale moonlight and golden sunlight, something fragile began to grow between them. Kyle carried the weight of his wounds, yet he refused to rest long. He knew that danger followed them like a shadow. Every step was risk. Every sound in the trees could be death. Yet no matter how heavy the path became, he never let Celine feel abandoned. Celine, on her part, was slowly regaining her strength. At first, she could barely walk without leaning on Cale. But as the nights passed, her energy returned. She still looked pale and weak, but the fire in her crimson eyes was beginning to burn again. Sometimes Cale would catch her gazing at the stars as if seeing them for the first time. One night they stopped near a river. The sound of rushing water filled the air. Cale lit a small fire and Celine sat across from him, her hands stretched toward the warmth. For a long while they did not speak. Then Celine's voice broke the silence. "Do you miss your home?" she asked. Kyle looked at the fire. "Every day. I remember the fields of wheat, the sound of my mother's laughter, the way the village bells rang at dawn. I wonder if it still stands or if the war has swallowed it." Celine lowered her eyes. "I have no home to miss. My mother's palace was a prison. Her words were chains. Even when I walked free, I was not free. She wanted me to be like her, cold, merciless, blind to suffering. But I could never be." Cale studied her face. For the first time, he saw the depth of her pain. She was not only a prisoner of chains, but of expectations she had never wanted. His heart ached for her. "You're not like her," he said firmly. "I saw it in your eyes the first night. You're not a monster." Her gaze lifted, meeting his. In her eyes, the firelight flickered like fragile hope. And you? You're not like other humans. They see me as a beast, but you see me? Kale's chest tightened at her words. He did not know how to respond, so he stayed silent. Yet the silence was not empty. It was filled with something unspoken, something neither of them dared to name. As days turned into nights and nights into days, their bond deepened. They spoke of dreams, of fears, of the lives they wished they had lived. Kale told her of the stars above his village, how he would lie in the fields and imagine touching them. Celine told him of her dreams of peace, of a world where blood was not spilled every night, where vampires and humans could walk the same roads without fear. At times, they laughed together. It startled Celine, the sound of her own laughter. She had forgotten what it felt like. And Kale found himself smiling more than he had in years. But beneath the warmth of their growing closeness, danger was never far. Both armies were searching. Rumors spread, whispers of the vampire princess vanishing into the night with a human warrior. Some called it betrayal, some called it blasphemy, and both sides wanted them found. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Kale stood guard at the edge of a clearing. Celine walked to his side, her silver hair glowing in the fading light. For a moment they simply stood together, listening to the quiet hum of the forest. "Why do you stay with me?" she asked suddenly. "You could have left me to my fate. You could have returned to your people. Instead you carry me, protect me, risk your life every moment. Why?" Kale turned to her. His eyes were tired but steady. "Because I gave you my word. And because I can't imagine walking this path without you anymore." Her lips parted and her breath caught. No words came, but her eyes glistened with unshed tears. That night Celine did not sleep far from him as before. She rested close to the fire, close to Kale, her head tilted toward him as though even in sleep she wanted to remain near. The war raged on beyond the forest. Armies marched, blades clashed, blood flowed. But for Kale and Celine, the nights by the fire became a sanctuary, a fragile peace in a broken world. And though neither of them dared to say it aloud, they both felt it. The dangerous, beautiful truth blooming quietly in their hearts. They were no longer just a warrior and a princess. They were something more, something worth fighting for. The peace Kyle and Celine had found in the forest was fragile, like a flame flickering in the wind. They both knew it could not last. The world outside was already stirring. Armies marched. Scouts searched. And when word reached the vampire queen that her daughter was alive and with a human, the fires of war burned hotter than ever. The queen's fury was beyond measure. Her throne room shook as she rose, her voice carrying across the halls like thunder. "My daughter walks with a mortal? She dares to shame her blood, her name, and her queen? Then she is no daughter of mine. She will be dragged back in chains, and the man she clings to will die screaming at my feet." Her generals bowed, but even they trembled at her wrath. Orders spread swiftly. Villages were burned for information. Human soldiers were slaughtered without mercy. The hunt for the princess and her human protector began. Kale and Celine felt the weight of this storm even before it reached them. One night, while resting in a hidden cave, Kale awoke to the distant glow of fire in the trees. Villages nearby were burning. He clenched his fists, knowing whose command had caused it. "They're coming for us," he said grimly. Celine's face was pale, her crimson eyes filled with sorrow. "She will never stop. My mother will tear the world apart to find us, and when she does, she will kill you." Kale looked at her, his voice steady though his heart carried the weight of truth. "Then let her come. I would face her 100 times if it means I don't lose you." Her breath caught, and she turned away, hiding the emotion that trembled in her eyes. She wanted to believe him, but fear gripped her heart. She knew the queen's power, and she knew Kale was only human. Brave, stubborn, unbreakable in spirit, but human nonetheless. Their journey became harder with every passing day. They could no longer light fires for warmth, for the smoke would betray them. They walked in silence, listening for the snap of branches that might mean hunters were near. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the clash that was coming. It came sooner than they hoped. One morning, as the mist curled around the trees, Kale and Celine were ambushed. A dozen vampires descended from the branches, their eyes glowing red, their claws sharp as blades. Kale drew his sword without hesitation. His muscles ached, but his resolve was unshaken. "Stay behind me," he shouted. Celine wanted to fight, but her strength had not fully returned. She could feel the old magic stirring in her veins, yet it was weak, a shadow of what it once was. So she did as he asked, though her heart twisted with guilt. The battle was fierce. Cale's sword flashed in the mist, striking down one foe after another. But he was only one man against many. Claws tore at his armor. Fangs snapped at his throat. Blood spilled, and still he fought, refusing to fall. Selene cried out his name as two vampires pinned him down. Without thinking, she unleashed a wave of dark energy that surged from her hands. The blast tore through the mist, sending the creatures flying. Her chest heaved, her power returning in bursts wild and uncontrollable. Kyle pulled himself back to his feet, his sword dripping with blood. Together they stood back to back, human steel and vampire magic fighting as one. The ambush was crushed, but not without cost. Cale's arm was cut, his breath ragged. Selene's strength was nearly spent. When the last vampire fell, silence returned to the forest. Selene turned to him, her hands trembling as she reached for his wound. "You'll die if we keep running like this. My mother will crush us both." Cale caught her hands gently, holding them against his chest. His voice was quiet but firm. "If death comes, let it find me standing by your side. I won't abandon you, Selene. Not now, not ever." Tears welled in her crimson eyes. She had lived centuries without shedding a single tear. But this man, this mortal, brought them forth as easily as the night brought stars. That night, they did not speak much. Selene stayed close to him, tending his wounds with careful hands. Cale stayed awake, sword across his knees, listening to the distant cries of hunters in the dark. They both knew what was coming. They could not outrun the Queen forever. Sooner or later she would find them. And when she did, they would face not just soldiers, but the full fury of a ruler who had never known defeat. But in the quiet moments, when Selene's head rested lightly on Cale's shoulder and his hand covered hers, the fear faded. Together, they believed just for a moment that love was worth the coming storm. The night of reckoning finally came. For weeks, Cale and Selene had moved from shadow to shadow, hiding in forests and caves. But their steps could no longer escape the eyes of the Queen. Her army spread across the land like fire, and at last they cornered their prey. It began with the sound of wings. Dozens of black shapes blotted out the moon, their eyes glowing crimson. From the ground came the march of armored vampires, their spears gleaming. Cale and Selene stood on the edge of a ruined valley, nowhere left to run. And then she appeared. The Queen. She descended like a storm, her presence so heavy it made the earth tremble. Her gown was black silk, her crown glimmered like spilled blood, and her eyes were fire. Selene's breath caught. She had faced her mother's cruelty before, but never her full wrath. "Daughter," the Queen said, her voice sharp as steel, "you shame me. You betray your blood for this worm?" Her gaze turned to Cale, filled with disgust. "A fragile human dares to touch what is mine. He will die screaming." Cale gripped his sword tighter. His heart raced, but he stood tall. "She is not yours," he said. "She belongs to no one but herself." The Queen laughed, a sound that chilled the air. "Then you will die first." The battle exploded. Vampires swarmed like shadows, and Cale's sword flashed in the moonlight. He cut down one, then another, but more poured in. His muscles burned, his breath grew ragged, but his will was unshakable. Selene unleashed what strength she had. Dark fire crackled from her hands, tearing through the ranks of soldiers. The ground split beneath her power, the sky itself darkened. Yet her magic was wild, unstable. Every burst left her weaker, her body trembling with the effort. Still she fought. Not for her crown, not for her mother's empire, but for the man who stood beside her. At last, Cale found himself face to face with the Queen. Her claws were long as daggers, her movements swift as lightning. Their blades clashed, steel against shadow. The force of her strike shook his bones, but he held his ground, refusing to fall. "You are nothing," the Queen hissed. "A mortal insect." "Maybe," Kyle said through gritted teeth, his sword locked against her claws. "But even an insect can fight when it has something to protect." The Queen roared and flung him aside. His body crashed against the stones, blood spilling from his lips. Selene screamed his name and rushed forward, her power flaring like a star. In that moment, something inside her broke free. Her chains, those her mother had placed on her spirit, shattered. Power surged through her veins, brighter and stronger than ever before. She rose into the air, her silver hair glowing, her crimson eyes burning with fierce light. "Enough, Mother," Selene cried, her voice echoing through the valley. "You call love weakness, but it is strength. Greater than your cruelty, greater than your crown." The queen snarled and lunged at her daughter, their powers colliding in a storm of shadow and flame. The sky cracked with their fury, the earth splitting under their clash. Kyle, broken but unyielding, forced himself to his feet. His vision blurred, his body screamed in pain, but he lifted his sword one last time. With every ounce of strength left in him, he charged into the storm. Selene saw him coming. In a single heartbeat, she reached for him. Their hands met, human and vampire, and together they struck. His blade pierced the queen's heart at the very instant Selene's magic tore through her body. A scream shattered the night as the queen's power crumbled. Her form dissolved into dust, carried away by the wind. The battlefield fell silent. The army, leaderless, fled into the darkness. The war in that moment was ended. Selene fell to her knees, her power spent. Kale collapsed beside her, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Blood covered him, his sword lay broken, and his eyes were half closed. "No," Selene whispered, gathering him into her arms. Her crimson tears fell onto his wounds. "Stay with me, please. Don't leave me now." Kyle's lips curved into the faintest smile. His hand brushed her cheek, weak but gentle. "I promised I wouldn't," and against all odds he held on. For love for her, for the bond they had forged in fire and darkness. That night the queen fell. But something greater rose in her place, a truth that neither humans nor vampires could ignore. Love had won a war where swords alone could not. The war was over. The queen was gone. Her shadow no longer darkened the land. For the first time in centuries, the vampires were free of her cruel rule. And yet the valley was quiet, haunted not by victory but by the sight of a broken human lying in the arms of a princess. Selena held Kyle tightly, refusing to let go. Her tears fell onto his wounds, her heart breaking with every shallow breath he took. "Don't leave me," she whispered again and again. "I cannot win this world if I lose you." But Kale lived. His body was weak, yet his spirit clung to her voice, to her warmth, to the love that bound them. Days turned into weeks as Selene cared for him, refusing rest, refusing despair. With every sunrise, his strength returned a little more. The vampires, once servants of fear, began to gather around Selene. They had seen her defy the queen. They had seen her fight for love. No throne or crown commanded their respect more than that act. Slowly they knelt before her, not as slaves, but as people willing to follow a new kind of ruler. And when Kale finally rose from his bed, scarred but alive, the people cheered for him too. A human who had dared to fight their queen and survive. A human who had stood beside their princess as an equal. Selene knew then that the old ways could end. She would not rule with cruelty. She would build a kingdom where humans and vampires no longer hated each other, where fear no longer chained hearts. One evening, beneath the silver glow of the moon, Selene and Kale stood together before the gathered people. Her crimson eyes softened as she turned to him, and her voice trembled with emotion. "Kyle," she said, "you gave me freedom. You gave me love when I thought it could never be mine. You faced death for me again and again. Now I ask you, not as a princess, but as a woman, will you stand with me not as protector but as husband?" The world seemed to stop. Kale's breath caught. He had fought wars, faced monsters, challenged a queen, but never had his heart raced as it did now. Slowly, a smile spread across his face. "I was yours the moment I first saw you," he said. "Yes, Selene, I will stand with you always." The people roared in joy. The vampires, who once believed love to be weakness, cheered for their princess and her chosen warrior. Even the humans who had long feared the night felt hope bloom in their hearts. The wedding was unlike any the world had seen. In the ruins of the queen's old castle, flowers bloomed where darkness once thrived. Lanterns lit the halls, music filled the air, and for the first time, humans and vampires celebrated together. Selene wore a gown of silver and crimson, her beauty so radiant that even the stars seemed pale. Kyle, dressed in armor polished to shining white, looked upon her as though she was the only light in the universe. When they spoke their vows, there was no crown, no throne, only the promise of two souls bound together. "I am yours." "In darkness and in light," Selene whispered. "And I am yours?" "In battle and in peace," Kale replied. They sealed their vows with a kiss, and the world seemed to breathe again.